Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear Deputy Secretary General, welcome to this event which focuses us on two of what some people have referred to mega trends, which is one, how is it that we can manage what is in human history an unprecedented moment, namely that the majority of the world's people now live in cities and that proportion, that percentage will continue to increase exponentially in some parts of the world, in a more stable fashion in other parts of the world, but certainly if you would describe it in terms of stages on which things happen, certainly the city as a platform, as a stage, is a key center stage of what happens in political, in economic, in social, environmental terms, and yes, in development terms. And therefore, in a week of the high-level political forum where we focus on the 2030 agenda, on the Sustainable Development Goals, it is very appropriate that we should be focusing also on the question of cities and human settlements, but, and this is the second mega trend if you want, simply growing things is a kind of concept that is increasingly one that we have to put into the context of a more historical approach. Safe, resilient and sustainable are the qualifying terms that we are using for the discussion this afternoon. It points to much of what has become part of the 2030 agenda, both in terms of the social and the environmental, but inextricably linked also to the economic future of cities and the people within them. Therefore, it is also my great pleasure to welcome my dear colleague, the Executive Director of UN Habitat, who in the United Nations family represents the anchor point for what we call the urban agenda. With UN Habitat, the World Urban Forum, and also Habitat 3 now behind us, we have a significant number of reference points that provide further amplification of what, in the Sustainable Development Goals context, we have tried to address at a more strategic level. Above all, the discussion this afternoon will draw on the experience and the expertise of very distinguished speakers, and I want to briefly introduce them. His Excellency Mr. Basim bin Yaqub Al-Hamar, Minister of Housing of Bahrain, Ms. Celestine Ketcher-Cortez, Mayor of Bangangté in Cameroon, Ms. Penny Abaya-Wardena, Commissioner and the Mayor's Office for International Affairs of New York City, Mr. Parks Tao, the President of United Cities and local governments, and to some of you also associated inextricably and forever with Johannesburg, where he led the city. Ms. Violet Chiwutsi, Chair of the Huairu Commission, Women, Homes and Community, a global grassroots network, sitting right next to me, and our Deputy Secretary General, who will in a moment lead us off into this afternoon's event, Amina Mohammed. Before I open the floor, and we are in good time, let me just remind us that these events are always slightly delusional. They put an extraordinary amount of expertise on the podium, expect deep and meaningful and substantive presentations to be made, but all in the time that it takes to buy a cup of coffee in New York City. Now, to some of you that may mean an hour, but actually it's not, it's 5 minutes. So to the speakers, I would like to appeal, if you could focus on what you would like people to walk out of the room and remember, rather than what you think they should remember, then that is always a good orientation point. We are in this hall people who generally come with a great deal of knowledge, insight, and experience. What we look for is the leadership ideas, and this panel is a wonderful example for that. So please forgive me, as moderator, I have been paid badly, but nevertheless, to keep us on time, because also this room will need to be cleared after that. So I will try and remind us of the pace for the presentations this afternoon. With these brief introductory remarks, let me also say, since I'm not sure all of you would know me, and I forgot to say this at the beginning, I have this wonderful abbreviation here, the UN SDG Vice Chair, which is the UN Sustainable Development Group, the chair being our Deputy Secretary General. And I also head the United Nations Development Programme as the administrator. And so in that spirit, I am not only a brother to Maimuna, but also a great ally of what UN Habitat represents in our family of UN institutions, and hopefully to you as a community who care about the future of cities and the urban agenda. With these remarks, may I turn now to our Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hakim. Excellencies, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just going to start by saying that wonderful orientation that Hakim Steiner gave us should come in the letter of invitation, because we now all have like 20-page speeches, but we will take heed. It does give me great pleasure to be with you today, highlighting the importance of sustainable urban development, and in particular that we are going to see this with a lens for many of our different countries represented by our distinguished panelists. As we assess progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, and especially Goal 11 in this week, there's much encouraging news from around the world. At the same time, it's clear that we have more to do to address the challenges and the opportunities associated with rapid urbanization. The economic, social, and environmental forces that shape and shift our societies are evolving rapidly, and it is in our cities that we see this play out visibly and in significant ways. How we manage urbanization and the growth of our cities in the next decade will have a tremendous impact on the transformation we envisage in the 2030 Agenda. The economic power of cities is enormous. Cities accounted for 82% of our GDP in 2014, and this number is expected to reach 88% by 2025. But cities are also the locus of complex and interconnected challenges. They produce more than 70% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. They use 80% of the world's energy and generate 1.3 billion tons of waste every year. Poverty is becoming increasingly urban, and cities are also home to crime and diverse forms of violence, including the trafficking of people and illegal drugs. Moreover, a high proportion of the people and economic activities affected by extreme weather events is increasingly concentrated in our urban centers, where people living in slums and informal settlements are the most vulnerable. For these reasons and more, we need to get urbanization right. The adoption of the new urban agenda at Habitat 3 in Quito in 2016 really marked a turning point for our collective recognition of the impact of urbanization. It offers practical strategies and tools, and it frames the imperative for our sustainable future in light of the rapid urbanization that we see. These include national urban policies to ensure that we've got a balanced territorial development and urban design, looking at land use, planning that promotes growth and climate mitigation, urban resilience, and poverty eradication. The UN system does have a really important role to play in assisting member states to implement the new urban agenda and the 2030 agenda. And to join Akim in welcoming our Maimouna Sharif, our lead for UN Habitat, who are shaping what it is that we need to do to actually tackle the implementation of the urban agenda, shared with us her vision yesterday, and I hope we will pick up those points today. Towards this end, the UN system also is going through a reform. Being fit for purpose to implement the 2030 agenda is something that we have long asked for, and member states have pushed us to come up with that vision and approved it just 2 months ago. So this also offers important opportunities, better coordination, but also new leadership in development and repositioning how we implement the Sustainable Development Agenda. The report we distributed to you today demonstrates the results the UN Development System achieved in 2017 in delivering the integrated support for the 2030 Agenda. And the UN Development Group, that's been renamed the UN Sustainable Development Group, is there really to support governments and national partners in over 165 of our countries. The report has shown important gains upon which we can build, most of which is the response that we have given to over 100 countries in asking how to shape and help with the implementation of plans for implementing the 2030 Agenda. Going forward, we're going to need to step up the pace, and we look forward to hearing from you how that should it present itself. What support do we need as we look at an integrated approach to development? And that we strive to create cities that drive progress towards the SDGs. How we involve you all, how we partner with you, this is one example of it, but it's got to go well beyond these walls to the country level, will really give us the ambition of success. We estimate that at least 110 of our 169 targets require direct intervention from local authorities, so we know how important the partnership with you will be. The Secretary-General and I, let me say, fully committed to the collective efforts. So is the UN SDG in ensuring that we have determining that environment for inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable cities and settlements for everyone, absolutely everywhere. I look forward to hearing what the panelists have to say for us today, the feedback from the audience, so that we can inform our implementation of the reforms as we embark upon attempting to get 2030, before 2030, in every single one of your countries in the SDGs. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Deputy Secretary General. May I now turn to His Excellency Minister Al-Hammer, Minister of Housing, Bahrain. And Minister, I'm sure you also have prepared remarks, but particularly in terms of also the 5-minute orientation, what would be of extremely direct interest is the experiences of the Governor of Bahrain in, for example, the context of affordable housing, not an insignificant part of the urban agenda and also of leaving no one behind, but equally progress that has been made on climate change mitigation, urban development, both topics that I know Bahrain has taken very seriously. So it's a great pleasure to give you the floor.
Well, thank you very much. I think I will just put my speech away.
I think so.
My fellow panel members, good afternoon or good evening or what time it is, I'm not too sure. I'm really honored and privileged to sit with the panelists here, such a distinguished people sitting next to me, or I'm sitting next to them. It is making me somehow a little nervous because of the knowledge they have, because they are specialized in this field. And really, this is an experience, and this is something that I will not forget and forgive also in my life. Let me speak a little bit about Bahrain and Bahrain experience and journey with housing. Bahrain started its housing program in 1962. At that time, there were no MDGs and there were no SDGs. But it all started because of a vision from the leadership to achieve a high standard of living for its citizens and to prepare them for a modern state. In fact, it all started before Bahrain got its independence. In the 70s, we got our independence. And the housing program went ahead to be exact, in 1962. I was explaining at an earlier panel today that it started at a time where we had no overcrowding, and it started where we had no waiting list. And in fact, the term social housing was not so popular, and it was not widely circulated at that time. When the Kingdom of Bahrain built its first town, they were basically trying to encourage citizens to come and live in that town, and it was very difficult to convince people to leave their old, nice neighborhoods with their families and so forth. The first town built in Bahrain, it was like changing the mindset of people. It is a modern town, with modern amenities, and it did something very good to my country because it attracts people from different part of the country under one living place. And today, so many dignitaries, ministers, doctors, engineers came out of this new entity, a new town. And later on, it became an example. Still, it is an example which Bahrain always referred to. Housing is extremely challenging, and it is very difficult. It does not totally, it's not necessarily, you cannot solve it with resources, financial or land. It is very dynamic. It needs a continuous overview of the policies and validation to validate the policies and do another validations and so on. I can, however, say that with the limited resources of the Kingdom of Bahrain, I personally feel, with no prejudice, that Bahrain has a unique experience in dealing with the housing. And this housing has a program has done its outstanding results in really impacting the style of living, standard of living of its population. I truly believe, to conclude, that Bahrain managed to shift its focus with dealing with housing from being a local agenda into targeting an international agenda. I'm talking here about the goal 11. I can talk a little bit more about it, but I think that's my input for you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And certainly, I know your speech will have more details maybe carried with it, so hopefully we will make that part of the record of the meeting. May I now turn to the Mayor of Bangangte, Madame Corté, and ask her to, in particular, address also this notion that this week at the High-Level Political Forum, I think we're hearing a lot about, which is how at the level below national government, federal governments, can subnational authorities, municipalities and mayors play not just an implementing role, but a leadership role in relation to Agenda 2030? And are SDGs actually something that make your life easier or more complicated? Over to you.
Merci beaucoup, Excellence, Monsieur le Président, distingués panélistes, distingués participants. Je suis très heureuse, une fois de plus, de participer à cette rencontre, ce genre de panel qui vise à toucher du doigt les actions qui peuvent être des actions clés de succès de nos multiples agendas. Les agendas mondiaux de développement qui, il faut le dire pour moi, et je le dis toujours, sont des agendas pour l'Afrique. Je vais vous dire pourquoi, rapidement. Pour les élus locaux, c'est-à-dire les maires, mais aussi pour les femmes. Depuis ce matin ou depuis hier, nous avons beaucoup parlé de l'agenda de développement pour l'Afrique, mais je voudrais aujourd'hui parler de l'agenda. The translation is not working, so I will try to speak in English. My English.
You should speak in French.
Actually, I'm sorry, I was following live, so I just realized the interpreters are non-existent, so I apologize. As you can imagine, sometimes with side events, it's simply not feasible. So is it okay with you in
It's okay.
wonderful English?
I will try. So I was saying that as president of Female Mayor of Africa, as Queen Mother in Bangante, my council, as mother, I'm every time now very happy to talk about development agenda, and mainly talking about localizing this agenda. Because if you take SDGs 2030, SDG 2063, new urban agenda, as well as Paris Agreement, you will see that this agenda is truly the development agenda. And for me, as a local elected woman and mayor of my city, is Africa agenda. Because this development concerns, as the first point, our continent. Because we can't think that all the continent are developed, and Africa, which is so rich, is not developed. So it's our agenda. But for now, I will speak about local authorities, mayor agenda, as well as female agenda, because it's on the territory that all this agenda has to be implemented. And we say no leave no one behind. But if you take the organization of our society, you will see that on the ground level, you have councillor, we are more many than parliamentary. That means mayor are many than deputy. How do you call a deputy in English? Parliament. That means those who are so much at the local level are there to implement the development agenda. And when you go over the local authorities, we women, we are 52% in Africa. We are 51% in the world. That means the development agenda, Mr. Chair, is for us local authorities agenda as well as women agenda. If you put local authorities at the table and women at the table, we'll be sure that all this agenda will have a result. And talking about localizing this agenda, I will try to use the key message that as member of Global Task Force, we have put at the table of United Nations, talking about how to make sure that this development agenda being success. We need to make sure that local authorities has appropriate the SDGs. We need to make sure that local authorities are putting at the table of the nation or the central government in order to put this report, this voluntary report, has to take into consideration the view of local authorities. Also, it's very important to make sure that we have the active and dynamic participation of our citizens. We need to call for the partnership between the central government, the civil societies, and the private sectors and the local authorities. When we have all these people and women at the table, we can make sure that we'll co-create sustainable and resilient cities for our population. And I will also talk about some examples that can show that putting local authorities at the table will accelerate the process of delivering services in this development agenda. I will take the campaign of that we launched in Africa called Know Your City. This campaign has put on the table all the people who can bring their proposal, mainly people with poor condition, people without slum, people without houses, who show us how to transform the territory in which they are living. And we have put also in this campaign, Know Your City, women who has shown us how to make a city being a, how to call it in English, vivre ensemble. Women are the center of the family, and women are those who can show how can we make everyone live together in peace, in synergy, and deliver all the services that can sustain the development agenda. I will also talk about the dynamic of this partnership to use the potential of all the diversity that we have on the territories, knowing that it's from the city that we can learn about the population. It's from the city that we can learn about the need of the population. It's from the city that we can know exactly how to implement all the SDGs agenda. And taking a small example also, I would say that the local authorities are those, I'm calling them the doctors of the population. You can take the small needs, from the small need to the big need. I would take, for example, as mayor, I've decided with cooperation development to put in place in school ecological latrines. These are small activities that can change life and accelerate the development or the putting in place of a development agenda. So we have put this ecological latrine in school. Out of that, the number of young girls who came back to school because there were toilets at school has increased. And I think that those are small activities that only the local authorities know exactly where to do it, how to put it, and to push our young girls who are, I will tell it again, who are the critical sub. Because if we need SDG 5 to happen, we need to make sure that our young girls are going to school. We need to make sure that our young girls will be at the table because they will have competencies. Thank you for your kind attention.
Again, dear Celestine, thank you for addressing us in a language not of your own making, but with a wonderful accent. It actually makes English even more beautiful. I would now like to turn to Penny, who represents the city, and to my knowledge, the first city that has submitted to the United Nations a report on the implementation of the SDGs, and something that I very much welcome because I live in this city and I can see so many areas in which the SDGs could come and are coming alive. So we look forward to your presentation on behalf of the City of New York, but also in terms of the subject that we have before us this afternoon. Over to you, Penny.
Thank you so much. Excellencies, colleagues, and honored guests, on behalf of Mayor Bill de Blasio, I would like to welcome you to your proud host city for the ministerial segment of the High Level Political Forum. I am honored to join you today to share practical examples of how New York City is proactively taking and putting the global goals into action in our 5 boroughs. Although the global goals are national commitments, it has been widely recognized that cities and other local authorities are essential partners to ensuring that the goals are achieved. As host to the United Nations, the New York City Mayor's Office for International Affairs is uniquely positioned to amplify, share, and learn from policies and best practices from cities and national governments around the world. We have spent the last few years creating programs like Global Vision Urban Action and establishing partnerships with UN affiliates and permanent missions to achieve just that. Last week, we were thrilled indeed to be the first city in the world to submit a voluntary local review directly to the United Nations. To mark the occasion, Mayor de Blasio issued a mayoral proclamation declaring July 11th Global Goals Day. Sometimes it's the little things. The voluntary local review is part of our ongoing efforts since 2015 to highlight the synergies between the global goals and One NYC, New York City's local sustainable development strategy. By sharing the review on local work towards the global goals, the New York City Mayor's Office for International Affairs continues its advocacy for city perspectives to be considered at the United Nations. First, I'd like to provide some background on One NYC, Mayor de Blasio's strategy to build a stronger and more just city for all. In April 2015, our city committed to the principles of growth, equity, sustainability, and resiliency through a groundbreaking strategy, which we hope will be a model for sustainable development at the local level. The consultative process to develop One NYC began in late 2014. It involved 71 agencies. It included residents and businesses, as well as an advisory board comprised of civic leaders, policy specialists, and most importantly, community leaders. Leaving no one behind is central to One NYC. We truly believe that our aspirations, New York City focuses its efforts on inclusion throughout the 5 boroughs in our most vulnerable neighborhoods to ensure that all who wish to participate and contribute are given an opportunity to do so. To ensure accountability to New Yorkers, the principles laid out in One NYC were defined in concrete terms, which include commitments, milestones, and metrics, and an annual progress report that is released on Earth Day every year. When world leaders committed to the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, we recognized right away the synergies with our local strategy and established the Global Vision Urban Action Platform so that we could use the common framework and language of the SDGs to learn from as well as share our city's innovations and sustainability with cities and countries across the globe. And this is how we did it. Our first task was to map the links between One NYC and the SDGs. Once that was clear, we engaged in the following ways. We have taken international representatives as well as colleagues from the diplomatic corps to visit our communities to see firsthand our policies in action. We believe that experiencing tangible examples lead to productive dialogues on shared challenges and solutions. We have worked on bringing city leaders and experts to the UN to infuse a local perspective into global policy discussions. We convene large events to provide a platform for sharing ideas among local, national, and international perspectives on issues ranging so far from mental health to gender equity and decent work and economic growth. These events proved to be an excellent opportunity to both strengthen implementation by sharing best practices, but also to build broader political support for achieving the SDGs. We also know that youth engagement is critical to achieving the goals in the long term. Our New York City Junior Ambassadors program works with students throughout our 5 boroughs. Usually these students are based in our most vulnerable communities. The heart of the program is that they learn about the SDGs, connect with the United Nations, with senior diplomats that go into their neighborhoods. But most importantly, we are activating these young people to take action on the global goals in their own communities. I'm proud to say that earlier today, one of our very own New York City Junior Ambassadors from the South Bronx was at the UNICEF SDGs Media Zone speaking about the importance of youth leadership in achieving the SDGs. While the 2030 agenda is ambitious, we know that One NYC has shown progress is possible. In April 2018, Mayor de Blasio announced that we have made New York City's air and water cleaner. We've achieved record job and wage growth, and we've tripled the number of children accessing early childhood education, among other accomplishments. We aim to submit a voluntary local review annually. Please do hold us accountable. And we welcome engagement with cities as well as other SDG stakeholders to strengthen these reporting mechanisms. By using the common language of the global goals to discuss our shared successes and challenges, we know that by working together, we will achieve the 17 goals by 2030. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner, also on behalf of those of us who live within the boundaries of this city, but also for having made New York City part of a family of big cities around the world that are inspiring the implementation of the SDGs. And I personally can attest to some of these things really having an impact already now on the ground. So thank you for being with us today. And I turn now to the man who federates cities around the world. Parks Tao is president of United Cities and Local Governments. can speak about one city, about many cities, and about trends. So to you, Park Tao, the floor is yours. Some big thoughts on big trends that give us courage to think we're actually making cities part of the solution. Over to you.
Thank you very much, moderator. The challenge is to find the big trends in big cities. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I think it would be appropriate on behalf of the sector of local and regional governments to acknowledge the Deputy Secretary General for driving the 2030 localization initiative and the hub, because for us as local and regional governments, it indicates the commitment by the Office of the Secretary General and the Deputy Secretary General in particular to ensure that local government plays its role in the process of implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. Yesterday, when we gathered under the auspices of the Global Task Force at the Local and Regional Governments Forum, the Deputy Secretary General said two things amongst others, amongst the many things that she raised. The first was that we need you, as in the international community needs local government in the processes of implementation, but also went on to say that the UN has set out to establish a direct access facility for local and regional governments. And for us, this suggests that, in fact, in a significant way, the needle has moved. And the needle has moved in a significant way because we can think back to a number of platforms where it was, in fact, even difficult for local and regional governments to be acknowledged as partners in the process of implementation. Just to share an anecdote, when we were at the Financing for Development Conference, we had to speak behind the flag of business because local and regional governments literally did not have a platform from which to speak from. So the fact that we are in a position to engage from this platform indicates that this needle has moved in a significant way. But we have also said that as local and regional governments, we need to make a set of commitments. And these commitments include, amongst others, the need to strengthen awareness, policy commitment, and ownership amongst our local and regional governments and other partners. And one of the gaps we had identified is the reality that whilst we talk about the SDGs and their implementation at a global level, many of our members in the UCLG, more than 260,000 member municipalities and regions actually do not have an idea of what the Sustainable Development Goals are. So part of the work that we need to do is to ensure that we create awareness and policy commitment amongst our members. That we should also ensure the direct involvement of local and regional governments in the process of voluntary national reviews, so that they become active participants in the reports that are generated by their respective countries and make a direct contribution to that. We've gone on further, and in this year we'll be publishing tomorrow, in fact, our second voluntary report of our members' activities in implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's an indication that, in fact, as a sector, we are also committed, whilst not required by statute, we are committed to ensuring that we're able to report on the work that's being done by our members. That we should ensure the active participation of our members in regional forums on sustainable development, and that we should promote and support the development of tools for local and regional government self-assessment on the alignment of their development plans with the strategies with the SDGs, and indeed promote voluntary local reviews at both city and regional levels. We should also promote international cooperation and peer-to-peer exchange of knowledge for localization. I think I should say here that we have also decided on our own to create communities of practice in the implementation of the SDGs within the family of the United Cities and local governments, and that we should create a platform to support these communities of practice, best practice, and being able to provide the necessary institutional mechanisms that are able to support our members in the process of implementation. But we also see this as a partnership between ourselves, our national governments, and indeed the international community. And for us, it would be important for our national governments and the international community to foster an environment in which the voluntary national reviews include subnational government as part of the reporting process, so that these reports are seen almost as incomplete if they do not include the work of subnational government. That they should enhance the presence and spaces for dialogue for local and regional governments and national governments within the context of the high-level political forum, and that we should include specific follow-up processes to the VNRs and further develop the high-level political forum. And special attention needs to be paid to ensure that local solutions and actions are included in the quadrennial Global Sustainable Development Report and promoting the implementation of the New Urban Agenda as an accelerator of the SDGs, because for us, we do not see the New Urban Agenda and indeed the Paris Accord as separate from the SDGs. We see these expressing themselves as part of a common agenda towards 2030 that needs to be implemented and find expression at the local level through an integrated implementation program. And lastly, that we should rally local and regional governments to lead an international coalition for the implementation of SDG 11, so that in fact we ourselves take direct responsibility for our role. For everybody recognizes that to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, at least 65% of the activity needs to happen at a local and regional level. So we are there to say that we are ready to be partners, we are ready to implement, and we're ready to be the pivot around which implementation happens. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Parks, for both a broad but also very positive outlook. And obviously, we count very much on United Cities and local governments to be a driver in this. I know, DSG, you have probably the engagements and have already overstayed, not your welcome, but rather your timetable. So if you need to leave, please feel free to do so. We will continue with the program. Let me now turn to Violet Shiwutsi, the chair of the Hyrule Commission. Violet, over to you.
Wairo. Thank you. Our Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so humbled to be speaking on this panel. And today I want to share how movement building can enhance and accelerate implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. As a grassroots woman that have learned from struggles that we go through day to day, we have learned how movement building is actually a very strong approach in mobilizing ourselves and also in being able to enable us share experience and identify solutions to these problems. Through movement building, we are all set, we have been able to set our priorities and be able to engage in successful dialogues through a process we call local-to-local dialogue with our local authorities, development partners, and be able to come up with action plans. And for this, I want to give an example of what we did using this when the SDGs was launched. In 2017, we sat as grassroots women in Wairo Commission and decided that we want to use the same approach of movement building to be able to engage in sustainable development goals more effectively. We launched a program that we call Grassroots Women and National Pilots on SDGs. Through this program, we have been able to train, first of all, to make the communities understand that we are in the area of sustainable development goals, and they need to understand that these are now global policies that we are all counting on, because this is where we have gaps. Usually communities don't understand that we have these global policies that we all need to be looking upon. We were also able to map and identify what opportunities and gaps that are existing in our community in relation to the SDGs, and we used this information to call for meetings with our local authorities and share these gaps and be able to come up with action plans that can be able to help us all work as a collective in realizing the Sustainable Development Goals. This was a very strong tool because usually governments and communities are all looking for the same goals. They want to achieve the same development or priorities. But sitting together and being able to set their priorities and action plan to work as a group has usually been a very big problem. So through movement building, we were able to do this. When we did this, we already have in 19 countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, we have clear action plans with our communities and governments and local authorities, which are advancing up to the national level. And we are fitting into other institutions, like, for example, in Kenya, we have the SDG Forum, which is a big civil society mobilizing around SDGs, which we are working with them effectively, because it's easy to get a slot for one person to represent the grassroots women in this area because of our mobilizing skills. We also sat from all these countries at different regions in our continents to look at what was coming out strongly in our regions that needs to be advanced. Because we know we are, as much as we are speaking about the SDGs, but there are things that are really immediate in some regions and really diverse that needs to be looked upon in a context of that region. We have been able to identify such issues, and we are now working, we have regional plans that are advancing our SDGs. We also know that we cannot work alone as an organization. In movement building, we also identify other partners, like we have Slum Dwellers International, which we have also engaged in partnership to identify, because at times we are calling for the same things. How can we bring our messaging together? How can we work as one to ensure that when we are going to such places or when we are advancing SDGs, we are able to complement each other and advance the SDGs that we care about. So this has really enabled us to demonstrate the kind of partnership that we are calling for. And this also makes us to even engage more with governments at that regional level, with other institutions that are at the regional level and even at the global level. And I want to say that this is actually an example that I'm giving to say why I think movement building is actually important. And we can all see if we advance movement building, it will actually be very easy to accelerate implementation. The cost of training, we are able to do it through peer learning among ourselves as grassroots women, learning across nations, learning across region to region, and we don't have to sit in formal trainings to be able to know what we need to do, the targets that we are achieving, but we are also able to see what other people are doing and learn from the experience that other people are also doing or other nations are doing. It is from this that I am actually calling the Deputy Secretary to actually, if we can create time to sit with you and share our context on what movement building can be done, share the tools. We have developed tools like the ones I mentioned, the local-to-local dialogue, a process of mapping that engages the entire community. We have also developed tools that enable us to train and negotiate with our local authority so that we can be able to come with action plans. These are things that we can share, and we can be able to utilize them and enhance how we want to work on the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you.
Violet, thank you so much. Now, since you were so efficient, may I just add a small question to this? How do you deal with this argument that, people don't know what the SDGs are? I mean, you are building a movement around working with the SDGs. Yeah. How do you overcome this maybe preconception that 17 SDGs is too complicated, people don't know what it means? I assume, since you're working with them, that's not true, but how do you describe it as not being true?
Thank you. First, I started with showing how when we are sitting, we first identify the priorities. When we are identifying the priorities, we don't even start looking at the SDGs as the first thing. We look at what are the issues affecting us in the community. And then the second phase is how are these issues linked to the SDGs? And how can we, because most of the issues that we are addressing, for example, I would use an example of if we are talking about women access to land. For my community, we are not just looking at women access to land as one SDG. We are also looking at how does this advance women access to land and be able to produce food and also engage in agriculture as a livelihood that can enhance their economic well-being of household. So when we discuss from this kind of perspective, then we are discussing in a context that communities are able to understand the sustainable development goals right from the issues they care about in this community. And the other thing is also we are doing a lot of sensitization around things like the partnerships that we care about or which institutions have different mandates in delivering to these sustainable development goals and how are they linked with the national plans, with the county level development plans that are in our country. So it becomes easier to expand from this kind of understanding.
Thank you very much. Crystal clear. Now I turn to Maimouna Sharif, Executive Director of UN Habitat, and as I said at the beginning, UN Habitat is the anchor institution within our UN family of agencies, funds and programs on the urban agenda, but importantly, supported by the whole family of the United Nations system. And Maimouna and I, in fact, had a meeting a couple of days ago where we talked about the importance of, for instance, a program such as the UN's development program, UNDP, with its hundreds of projects in many countries around the world, being integral to supporting that ability to implement the urban agenda. So Maimouna, with that leadership role, but also with the pragmatic view of somebody who had the pleasure of being a mayor and now has the tough task of being an Undersecretary General, please address us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, friends, a very good afternoon. The new urban agenda, to me, is an accelerator to achieve the new dimension of the SDG. We need to put our platform right, to make cities right, and are we ready to implement the new urban agenda to achieve the SDG 11? I think we need to rethink, to do the rethinking of the government structure, either at the national level, the state level, and also at the local government. Are we ready to implement the new urban agenda? We also need for a rethinking of the existing governance structure, even at the national level, state level, or the local government. We also need to rethinking of the UN structure. We are very lucky that we now undergoing the SDGs reform towards one UN. And also, we already formed the UN SDG team, which is chaired by our DSG and also co-chaired by our UNDP administrator, Mr. Akim. We also need to rethink the municipal finance. Now it's many virtual economy, Airbnb, online exchanges. How is this contribute to the municipal finance? Because all these people are also using the urban infrastructure and utilities. We also need to rethinking the system of education system, the capacity building for the youth, for the women, for the boys and the girls. We need also to rethinking in terms of the availability of data. I think it's in the SDG report. We also mentioned about the availability of data, the Industrial 4.0, the IoT, and its analysis to enable leaders to make an informed decision. Rethinking in the disruptive technology frontiers, smart city solution. We also need to rethink on the methodology in engagement, in participation, and also rethink in terms of capacity building in the leadership at all levels, at the national, state level, and also at the local level, at the mayor's level. So we need all this rethinking of our existing parameters. We need to work together for inclusive and safe, resilient, sustainable cities and human settlement. What are the urban futures and urban settlement futures that we want to achieve to give a better quality of life in an urbanizing world, leaving no one behind and leaving no space behind? By that, UN Habitat has some experience working with the government and municipalities, private sector, and non-state actors coming together. For example, at the local level, Bolivia National Urban Policy. The government of Bolivia requested UN Habitat to support the development of a national urban policy. Why is it important to have an integrated, holistic, sustainable national urban policy? This is because it's as a tool that can be used by the government to provide an urban vision and use the power of urbanization to achieve sustainable development. With input from the regional and local level, as well as from communities and other stakeholders, a coordinated effort from the national level government can create conditions for inclusive, safe, resilient, sustainable cities and human settlement. This is what we call plan-led development. This experience, supporting 40 countries, shows that a national urban policies can promote horizontal linkages between sectorial policies, strengthen urban, peri-urban, and rural linkages through more integrated territorial development, and third, support the stronger vertical connection between national, regional, local government by defining the roles and responsibilities of each. And again, another example is our work on humanitarian and conflict prevention context in Iraq. We have been supporting Iraq in addressing the integration of Syrian refugees in host communities in Kurdistan region of Iraq, supporting internally displaced Iraq people that lack formal housing, land, property right, and location of return with camps that are integrated into urban areas, undertaking spatial, multi-sectoral analysis of impacts of crises of urban areas through city and neighborhood profiling. Camps are planned and built as cities' extension to prevent slum from forming when temporary accommodation is replaced with bricks and mortar. This approach has supported more than 25,000 internally displaced families into safe, dignified, within 11 camps connected to existing urban areas. Another example for the interagency cooperation is World Urban Forum. We are opening our World Urban Forum to the whole UN system, which is open, inclusive gathering that brings together participants from all over the world, representing government at national, regional, and local level, academia, civil societies, and others. The next session will be in Abu Dhabi in 2020, and I will welcome the whole UN system and everybody in this hall to come together for the World Urban Forum 2020 in Abu Dhabi. We already produced the sensitivities report of the implementation of SDG 11. UN Habitat now is in the stage of preparing our new strategic plan 2020 to 2025. We are also need to rethink of our priorities and tools for the next 6 years in implementing the new urban agenda, working together with our brothers and sisters in the other UN agencies, member states, and other stakeholders. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Akim, I used extra 1 minute. Thank you.
You deserve it with all that you have to carry. Maimouna, thank you for some very practical but also very strategic pointers of where this agenda is taking us. I now have this difficult task of seeing a room full of people. I have another 3 people who have been invited to address us very briefly with one key thought. I think it's probably unlikely that we will have time for a Q&A. So colleagues, please bear with me. I think you've received a wonderful panel in terms of inputs and spectrum. So we will try to now add 3 more perspectives on, which first of all, I'd like to invite Henk Ovink, the Vice Minister for International Water Affairs of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Henk, please.
Thank you, Chair, Moderator. Thank you all for your comments. Of course, I also prepared a statement, but I'll keep it shorter. As a representative for the Netherlands, I'd like to share 2 perspectives. The Netherlands is, and I'll keep it to resiliency in the context of cities. The Netherlands, the country in Europe, is like the same word for resilience. Without that resiliency, there would not be a country. But we are a kingdom. We have islands here in the Caribbean that also are represented. And how that comprehensive challenge this kingdom has can help build resiliency and connect the SDGs in its implementation comes through 5 C's. The first C is commitment. That commitment is critical from every layer of society. It's not only a government commitment on a national, but it's national, regional, and local. The second is cross-cutting. If we look at what we're doing, repeating the mistakes of the past will never get us to the 2030 agenda. I'm a water ambassador. If I look at the synthesis report UN Water presented, the world is off track. And off track means that we're nowhere close in getting where we need to be. So cross-cutting is important. I look at the commissioner from New York City. I served on President Obama's task force in rebuilding New York after Hurricane Sandy. One of the cross-cutting initiatives we put in place here in this city was Rebuild by Design, an effort to leapfrog towards that future by a planning and design approach with every stakeholder on the ground. So commitment, cross-cutting, critically important. Collaboration, inclusion is important. Without that inclusive approach, we will never get things done. And this is perhaps the hardest thing for any stakeholder. I always like to say it's great to work with your friends. It's a little tougher to work with family. It's even okay to invite your enemies because you know them and you know what you're up against. But inviting the ones you don't know, that is inclusion. Having the door always open, never being too late, leaving no one behind. That part of inclusion and of inclusive cities and of collaboration is critically important. It's built in the governance of the Netherlands when we started to live and work with water. It is something we like to connect with cities and nations and river basins around the world. For consistency, we can never stop. This never stops. And we think there is a quick fix or a silver bullet for climate change or the SDGs. No, forget it. After 2030, we're also not there. This will continue. We have to rethink our perspective on how consistency can lead our efforts forward. And last is capacity. Yesterday I was in a panel with your colleague from UNEP talking about data and how data leads to information, how information leads to knowledge, and knowledge hopefully to wisdom. But without capacity, data, information, knowledge, and wisdom actually are nothing. So building capacity with all communities around the world is critical. The Caribbean was hit hard by hurricanes last year. We put those 5 C's into practice with a hackathon, with innovation, with a fund, and we're replicating that approach now across the world. With Rebuild by Design, we put those 5 C's into practice here in New York, and we bring that practice now to Asia with a program called Water as Leverage, where we work with the cities of Chennai in India, Khulna of Bangladesh, and Semarang in Indonesia. Again, to leapfrog into that future, to prevent us to make the same mistakes we did in the past and rethink how we do our future. Last, I want to like to applaud UN Habitat with its approach, with its urban design and planning labs. On the ground, working with the communities, with the cities, with governance and businesses, rethinking how planning can actually lead to designs and designs to projects and projects to investment and implementation that will change the lives of many. We have to scale, bring these to scale, replicate them across the world to leapfrog into a future that is resilient, that is sustainable, and that stands for all the Sustainable Development Goals. The Netherlands is a partner of that approach, and we're committed, not only with our experience in Europe, but definitely also with the experience and expertise here in the Caribbean. Thank you.
Thank you, Henk, for these very clear messages and also for the commitment that the Netherlands has shown, including, as you also referred to, in the tragic events in the Caribbean last year. I think we all have learned some serious lessons again on first immediate response capacity and then the notion of building back better, which is integral to some of what you have alluded to. Let me now turn to Ricardo Messiano, who is the Sustainable Development Officer at the UN Economic and Social Commission of Asia and Pacific, UNESCAP. Ricardo, there you are. in wonderful prose, but brief.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I will be very brief. My intervention is about cooperation and partnership. We believe that United Nations Regional Commission brings substantial value and much needed regional perspective and insight to the development, implementation and reporting of global agendas like the New Urban Agenda and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Mr. Moderator, we really believe that continued collaborative efforts are necessary. And regional commission have been working to support the national level through supporting the national and local governments in operationalizing SDG 11 through frameworks for greater decentralization of function to local authorities to deliver SDG 11 on the ground. Number 2, inclusive stakeholders engagement for the implementation of this goal. Number 3, providing a policy dialogue platform for innovative local examples of effective implementation of SDG 11 by local governments and a diverse range of urban communities. And finally, my promise of being short, many of the indicators under SDG 11 require special data collection from subnational actors to effectively measure and report on progress. What we have been supporting so far is the harmonization, cooperation, and capacity development aimed at subnational data collectors in partnership with national statistical authorities. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you for the clear messages. Also, the equivalent of the golden boot for brevity today, so thank you very much. And let me last turn to Ryan Shah. On behalf of Rotary Youth for a Better World, where are you, Ryan? Can you? There you are. You have the floor.
Thank you to the chair. Oh, thank you. I will keep this very brief. I understand we all have very important things to do, especially the board. So I work with Rotary Youth for a Better World, which is a subset of over 750,000 Rotary Youth in over 40 countries in 30,000 chapters. And we work mainly to bring to light how we can get youth involved with implementing the SDG goals. Because to be completely honest, the future of the world rests on youth. If all of these goals are not met today, if they are not met by 2030, they need to be met at some point for the future of our world. And we want to be able to work today to get onto this. So we ask mainly to the board, to the leaders of the world, to the audience who is listening to me today, to please keep in mind that youth exists, that we need to invest in our youth, we need to educate our youth to become the leaders of tomorrow, because if we are not to fill your shoes tomorrow, we need to fill them today, and we need your support and your innovation, your excellence to bring us to what we need to be to make the world a better place. Thank you.
Ryan, thank you for that most eloquent of statements and for a reminder that it is youth who will inherit the problems, it is youth who can fix these problems, and therefore not only do you deserve a seat at the table here, you deserve our fullest attention. And I can say that both the Secretary General and many of us in our leadership positions right now in the United Nations system are very much focused on how to make the UN a partner to youth. I use those words very deliberately because it is not in telling you what to do, it is in enabling you to do what needs to be done that I think we can play our greatest role. So on behalf of the many that are here, thank you. Colleagues, I want to have 2 comments and questions. We have time for those. Anybody who feels either provoked or particularly inspired, this is your moment, and the only promise in this deal is it's got to be less than 60 seconds. I see a hand up there.
Journalist and I cover the UN, and my name is Rhonda Haubin, and I'm also a co-author of a book about the internet. And I guess my question is particularly for Penny, but it's for everybody. And that is, let's say that there's some people in a country or in a city, etc., know that there's a problem, that in fact, for example, affordable housing is being cut back, not being increased. But this is not what's being talked about. Is there some mechanism of hearing from the grassroots, of hearing from the people? And the internet makes this possible. So I'm wondering if you build this in any way in your plans, and if you have a mechanism. and if you've thought about how to do this, because I think that there's, like in New York, there's a lot of criticism there's a lot of pressure on the government to build for the high end and not for the lower end. And that in order to be able to deal with that pressure, you really need to be able to have those people who are fighting on the grassroots level to be part of the support for you and for what you're doing. So I'm wondering if you can tell us what mechanism you have. Thank you.
She will have to tell you in a moment as she steps off the podium, because I can't turn to the panel again. I just want to get a couple more comments. That part of the House that always feels it sits in the economy class of the hall. Anybody that I might have overlooked at the back? If not, I know there was 2 hands here. Very quick comments, madam, you, and then to you, and then we'll wrap up.
Yes, the comment is that as we begin to live and to end this meeting, it is very important for us to take back home the issues of community, grassroots women's movements, women's empowerment, in climate change, in terms of community resilience. That is the challenges we face now as community people. The partners, the donor agencies should look for us, help us to build movement towards challenging these accelerated problems of community resilience programs. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you for reinforcing that point, which I think has made its way throughout the presentations, in fact, today. Yes, please. No, yeah, just that's it.
Yes, maybe the comments from your hat as an UNDP administrator, Mr. Steiner, regarding the effort that UNDP can do with the regional governments and local governments. Unfortunately, they do not have the executive decision that the national and federal governments have usually. And how could the high-level political forum of 2018 help within the diplomacy and peace-building culture through the sustainable development economies? Yeah. Thank you.
Again, I will not take the privilege of being on the chair here to respond in detail, but to say that part of what the High-Level Political Forum already last year showed us, and this year is again showing us with the 47 reviews that are being presented and many other examples, is that one of the frontiers of the SDG implementation is in fact the relationship between national implementation and the mobilization and empowerment of subnational, local and regional capacities and institutions. But as you have heard along the whole bench and in the hall today, you know, cities are not things that belong to somebody who manages them. Cities are us, right? I mean, cities is people. Cities is citizens. Cities is, you know, people who, whether it is affordable housing, whether it is transport. I'm a fan of the taxi ferries, which I understand didn't in large part exist until 3 years ago, and now are suddenly part of the city's mobility concept, making parts of the city much more accessible than before. All of this is part of our work that we are engaged in as UN Habitat, as maybe UNDP, or also other organizations. I think we have to push the frontier forward. The SDGs are not the monopoly either of those in central government, nor are they the monopoly of government officials. They are a way of working together on development agendas. And this is what the HLPF, I think, is putting a wonderful spotlight on, whether it is through the eyes of a movement building perspective, through the city of New York, through also the experience that you presented from Bahrain. I'm just going down the mayor's perspective, cities and local government, or indeed Maimuna's task, which is to, in a sense, create that global network that allows us to do this essentially every day of the year, not just here in New York for a few days, where only some of us can participate in these meetings. Let me thank you all on the panel for being wonderful panelists. You have really given us a glimpse, but nevertheless a substantive one and a profound one into where you work and how you lead. Thank you all for your patience, for your engagement, your interest. This is a full house, even at the end of the session, always a good sign. Thank you and continue to have a good week.